As a parent, have you ever had to ask a child, quote, what is it going to take for you to grow up, unquote? Or maybe you've had someone to ask you the same question. Hi, this is Barry Phillips with 10-Minute Torah, day number 1 of the Torah portion and new book of study, Bamidbar. So let's go to Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter number 1. And as usual, let's start with verse number 1, this time just reading the opening phrase. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai. Comma, pause there. Not a whole lot of reading, but a lot to be said concerning the idea of being in the wilderness. Again, not making a doctrine here. Don't want to do that. Just an idea. It's interesting to consider, okay? Just a plausible thought. Bamidbar is spelled in Hebrew with a bet, a mem, a dalet, another bet, and a resh. Now let's break that down just a little bit. Bet, the letter bet is symbolic of the idea of a house. The letter mem is symbolic of the idea of water, can be mighty, can be chaos, such as tumultuous waves. So let's consider the idea of chaos. What do we have so far? A house of chaos. Well, that sounds interesting. The dalet looks like a door or a tent flap that is rolled up. So we have a doorway or an opening. Then we have another bet, another house, and a resh, which looks like the back of a man's head or refers to the chief one, the head, whoever's in charge, the chief, the supreme one. So symbolically speaking, and again, this is not a doctrine. Don't go run out and start preaching on this. It's just an interesting way of looking at things. The house of chaos opens to the house of the chief one or the supreme one. What does that mean? Well, sometimes in order to go up, life takes us down. Yeshua said that if we would lose, we win. If we want to live, then we need to choose to die. That is to die to ourselves. If we want to receive, the way to receive is to give. The value system or the mechanics of Yah's kingdom are oftentimes in opposition to or against the grain of the way of the world. We should not be shocked by that. I've taught this before at House of David, and consider this. Let's have a flat surface. And we are, say we're about here in our walk, and we're wanting to be elevated to a higher place. Well, the mechanics of Yah's system or his kingdom is means of advancing to another level. Sometimes is not to keep incrementally going up. Sometimes it causes us to bounce. In other words, there is an humbling of ourselves, and it is the recoil of the bounce that takes us higher. So there is a movement of that sort, and we wonder sometimes, how is it such a high and lofty place? How did I fall so fast? Well, the fall is not necessarily always because of sin. Sometimes there's just other life circumstances. Sometimes we end up in an emotional distress. Sometimes we find ourselves at a dark place, and it's in that dark place that we begin to cry out with greater fervency, and then realize that the intensity of our seeking Him and calling upon Him in a time of distress actually elevates us to a place that is higher than where we were previously. So testings are a means of advancement. And now, nobody wants to preach that. Nobody expects a lot of shouting territory or hearty amens about that, but that's reality. That's the way that things work. Consider the idea that Israel has come out of the land of Mitzrayim, and as far as their mindset is concerned, their self-awareness is concerned, they are a minimal people. They have been generationally taught, you're slaves. That's your lot in life. That's what you should expect in life. Your labors, your accomplishments are for the advancement of somebody else. You're not first choice. You're not first cut. You really don't matter that much. You're here for me. After you've been told that year after year, generation after generation, this is what your parents and even maybe your grandparents have indoctrinated you with. Whatever illustrious, glorious history may have been previous to that, it's pretty much gone and whitewashed over with failure. So there was a need of Yah to transform the mindset, the heart affections, the heart allegiances of these people from that of serving someone that was only there to abuse and to exert power and authority over them in a ruthless fashion, to now coming under the sheltering wings of the Most High. Let's also understand that this Elohim that Moshe was telling them about was not someone necessarily that they were greatly familiar with. They had become more accustomed to the gods and demonic idols, the dark systems of Mitzrayim or Egypt, than they had of the storied histories of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That being the case, this mighty one who had delivered them systematically out of the land of Mitzrayim and miraculously brought them into the wilderness, they still didn't know how much that they could trust him. They had built this structure for him to house his presence. They had seen fire and glory. They'd seen some effective things take place. They were getting there, but it was still required of them to go through an extended period of refinement. Now, at this point in the narrative, they're not destined necessarily for 40 years in the wilderness. That's going to come. But at this point, they're still on the immediate journey, and the reasonable expectation is, according to the rumor, according to what's been prophesied to them, we're going to enter into the land of our ancestors, and they say that we're going to have houses that somebody else built, and vineyards and farms and lands that have already been producing that is just going to be handed over to us. Not a lot of talk about the warfare necessary to get there, but they're going to inherit the land. At least that's what Moshe keeps telling them. Between where they are and this dysfunctional, broken down, defeated mindset of a people, and where they need to be, the people that they need to become, is going to be a wilderness experience of some length. And it's going to be an experience that's going to require a massive bounce. Consider this. In the book of Mark, the disciples are walking after Yeshua down a road, and he hears them arguing. And it says that in chapter number 9 and verse number, let me see this, 33, and they came to Capharnaum, that is to Capernaum. And having come into the house, he asked him, what was it you disputed among yourselves on the way? And they were silent, for on the way they had disputed with one another about who was the greatest. And sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wishes to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. And he exemplified this attitude by putting a young child in front of them and said, this is the kingdom, purity and innocence. For some of us, myself included, that's going to require a big bounce. Life may throw you a blow, but be prepared to bounce. and get to a higher place. We'll talk more tomorrow. To then, shalom.